Some places on Earth are so extreme that life there feels almost like a miracle. In certain regions of intense cold, temperatures can drop so low that settlements become some of the coldest inhabited places on the planet. Across scorching salt flats and vast deserts, powerful winds and relentless heat shape landscapes where survival is constantly challenged. At the same time, the highest mountains, enormous caves, and strange natural phenomena reveal worlds that feel completely different from everyday reality. This is a journey into the most extreme corners of our planet, where nature displays power and diversity far beyond the limits of imagination. Abuna Yamata-gu. Perched on a sandstone pillar in a dry and barren land, this place of worship feels like a fortress of faith hanging in the sky. To reach it, people must climb by hand across a steep rock wall at more than 8,200 feet, placing their feet on tiny holes with no safety equipment at all. Inside the rock chamber are ancient frescoes from around the 15th century, still bright and vivid, as if the paint had only just dried. What makes it even more extraordinary is that for centuries, from elderly people to mothers carrying children, worshippers have still made this climb as an act of complete faith. Around it, there are no gentle hills, only towering red stone pillars rising from a desert landscape, creating a view that feels both majestic and frightening. Carved from the rock since the 5th century, this sacred place also holds the bones of ancient monks who chose to remain there forever high above the ground. Mount Etna, Italy. Rising like a living force that never stops changing shape, this 10,991-foot volcano has burned like Europe's greatest fiery forge for about 500,000 years. In winter, it creates a surreal contradiction as bright red lava flows across blinding white snow, sending thick columns of steam into the cold sky. Etna's special beauty also lies in its smooth black sand stretching across wide valleys and sparkling in the sun like countless crushed, black diamonds. Etna has supported human life for thousands of years because its ash and volcanic rock create rich soil that helps farming and settlements grow around the mountain's base. Since ancient times, people have tied this place to myth, as if every explosion and deep rumble inside the mountain were the breath of a monster or the hammer of a god. That mix of fire, snow, myth, and human life around the lower slopes is what makes Mount Etna one of the fiercest yet most captivating landscapes in Europe. Ulan Lake, China. In the middle of a remote desert with no paved roads and no phone signal, Ulan Lake appears like a deep red heart beating across the sand. From the air, the lake is not round, but divided into several lobes connected by white salt lines, forming a shape almost identical to a real human heart. Around the red water are thick white salt rings created by strong evaporation, where temperatures can shift from below 32 degrees Fahrenheit at night to above 104 degrees Fahrenheit in the day, cracking the surface into vein-like patterns. The water is dense with salt and algae, so it looks thick like syrup and trembles when strong winds move across it. High heat and intense reflection from the salt disturb the air above the lake, and this unstable airflow has caused many drones to crash when flying too close to the surface. Devli, Namibia. Spreading beneath a burning sun, this magnificent and haunting natural graveyard is a place where life has vanished, but death has turned into an eternal masterpiece. Before your eyes, four violent colors collide: a pale white clay floor, charcoal black tree skeletons, walls of blazing red dunes, and a deep blue sky without a single cloud. When the water vanished suddenly, the clay pan cracked into countless sharp polygons, as if the whole earth had been dried down to the bone. The most chilling part is that these trees died nearly 1,000 years ago, but never fossilized and never rotted, because the extreme dryness baked them into black wooden corpses that still stand for centuries. Around this dead land rise dunes nearly 1,312 feet high, among the tallest on Earth, towering like giant walls of fire around the basin. At noon in summer, the sand can climb above 158 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to scorch your feet and make this place beautiful in a way that is both magnificent and merciless. Karhan Salt Lake, China. Standing on the surface of this vast mineral field, you are walking over 66 billion tons of salt, a brutal reserve large enough to supply 8 billion people for about 1,000 years. This dense mineral mass spreads across about 2,239 square miles, like dozens of major cities swallowed into one enormous basin. The astonishing part is that the salt crust is about 7 to 66 feet thick, strong enough for people to build a heavy railway and a 20-mile highway directly across the lake without any supporting pillars. In a blinding white landscape that looks like eternal snow, salt crystals grow into sharp flowers shaped like coral or pagodas, beautiful to see, but sharp enough to cut skin if you fall on them. The mix of magnesium, lithium, and potassium under changing light creates glowing pools in bright shades from jade green to pale yellow-green. This deadly-looking kingdom is actually an open-air treasure chest beneath the sky, holding rare mineral wealth worth more than $1,500 billion. Sun Dung Cave, Vietnam. This is no longer just a cave, but a buried underground world beneath tropical forest, so surreal that it feels like a real hollow earth. The cave even has its own weather, as vapor rises from the underground river, forms clouds, and creates rain inside the darkness, while beneath giant skylights, a jungle grows up to about 98 feet tall, reaching desperately toward the light. Over millions of years, calcium-rich water has built stalagmites around 230 to 262 feet high, standing like stone towers in the dark. Across the cave floor, house-sized limestone blocks lie beside soft white sand and a black underground river, creating a landscape that feels both breathtakingly beautiful and deeply unsettling. Danakil Depression. This is a giant fire basin lying about 410 feet below sea level, where the brightest landscapes are also the deadliest traps. It is known as the hottest place on Earth by average yearly temperature because the heat does not only fall from the sun, but also rises from the ground below. The most extreme site is the hydrothermal field, where boiling acid pools glow in yellow, neon green, orange, and red, looking beautiful but full of poison. In sharp contrast, white salt deserts stretch out like mirrors and reflect light so strongly that they can blind your eyes for a while in the burning heat. Because the Earth's crust here is very thin, magma stays close to the surface, so at night, parts of the depression can glow red from open lava lakes. And even though almost no tree can survive here, people still mine salt by hand and carry it away on camel caravans stretching for miles across a world that seems made against life. Chukotka, Russia. Standing at this frozen edge of the world, you feel as if one more step could throw you straight into tomorrow, because this is one of the first places on Earth to greet a new day. The strangest part is that when you look across the water, it feels like you are looking into yesterday, with a time difference of up to 21 hours across a narrow strait. Winter here is long, dark, and brutal, with temperatures often dropping far below 0 degrees Fahrenheit, while blizzards hit again and again, and summer passes almost in a flash. Nearly the entire land is treeless tundra, resting on permafrost, so buildings must stand on raised supports about 3 to 7 feet above the ground, and many blocks are painted bright red, yellow, and blue to fight the gloom of winter. With fewer than one person for every 5 square miles, the region is so empty that paved roads feel almost pointless, and in winter, the frozen rivers themselves become giant white highways. The isolation is so severe that fresh food can cost like a luxury item. Supplies arrive only by plane or ice-breaking ship, and even Russian citizens need special security permission to enter this region. Lençóis Maranhenses, Brazil. Lençóis Maranhenses is a rare natural paradox, a place where a desert holds water, and what looks like a dead sea of sand is actually alive with the rhythm of seasonal rain. Its name means bed sheets because from above, the pure white dunes look like giant linen sheets spread out in the wind. These ghost lagoons exist only from June to September, before evaporating completely in the dry season, leaving behind a vast landscape that looks like enormous white sheets. Even though it lies beside the Atlantic Ocean, the lagoons here are fresh water, fed almost entirely by rain and trapped above an impermeable layer beneath the sand. The water is never just one color. Some lagoons glow jade green, some shine pale blue, and others turn darker, all standing out sharply against sand as white as snow. This unreal beauty was even chosen by Marvel as the setting for the planet Vormir, a landscape so alien that it is hard to believe it truly exists on Earth. Urte Isle. Forget safe places with railings, because here, only a thin, brittle edge of rock stands between a person and lava boiling at about 2,192 degrees Fahrenheit. Because the volcano spreads across about 31 miles but rises only around 1,969 feet, the climb usually begins at night to avoid daytime heat that can reach about 122 degrees Fahrenheit. At the crater, the lava lake keeps breaking into glowing red patches and throws liquid fire about 33 to 66 feet into the air. path is also covered with black volcanic rock, sharp as broken glass, strong enough to cut through boot soles after only a few steps. The most haunting part is sleeping right on the crater rim, where you can feel the ground shake after each blast from the molten core. And to witness a lava lake that has burned for more than a century, travelers must cross a wild border region under the protection of armed escorts carrying AK-47 rifles. Badian Jaran Desert, China. Holding one of nature's greatest contradictions, this geological masterpiece buries human life so deeply that fewer than 100 people live scattered across a desert of nearly 18,919 square miles. The standing dunes here rise to about 1,509 feet, and when strong wind sweeps their slopes, the whole desert can roar like thunder, which is why it is known as the world's largest field of singing sand. The strangest paradox is that beneath this dry sand lies an underground water system feeding more than 140 lakes hidden between the dunes, turning the desert into a maze of water in a sea of sand. Under harsh sunlight, the water shifts into glowing patches of jade, pink, and purple, making the desert look as if it is shining from within. Around those bright eyes lie pure white rings of crystallized salt stretching for many feet, creating the strange illusion of frozen winter inside a blazing summer. This surreal beauty is not only overwhelming, but globally recognized because Badian Jaran was added to the UNESCO World Heritage List in 2024. Shibam, Yemen. Rising suddenly from a dry river valley, Shibam is called the Manhattan of the desert, with hundreds of mud towers packed tightly together. Under harsh sunlight, the lower walls almost disappear into the sand, while the upper levels and roof lines are coated in white lime, making the city glow like a floating range of snowy peaks. Since the 16th century, people here have built towers about 5 to 11 stories high, reaching nearly 100 feet, turning Shibam into one of the world's earliest vertical cities. Every structure was shaped by hand from earth, straw, and water, dried in the sun and stacked upward to transform dry valley soil into a skyline. Larongga Buddhist Academy, China. Larongga Buddhist Academy makes an unforgettable first impression as a vast sea of red homes covering the mountainside, serving both as a remarkable Tibetan Buddhist center and one of the largest religious study communities in the world. It stands at about 13,123 feet above sea level, where the air is about 40% thinner, so even ordinary daily life happens under the harsh natural conditions of the high plateau. The narrow valley and steep slopes force the buildings to rise in terrace-like layers, creating an unusually dense architectural pattern that looks striking and almost unreal from above. The red color of the thousands of houses contrasts sharply with the brown earth and rocky mountains, and when snow falls, the entire settlement appears like a glowing red mass in the middle of a white valley. This combination of massive scale, concentrated religious life, and visually surreal scenery has turned Larongga into a rare symbol of knowledge, discipline, and faith in a cold highland world. Mount Everest, Nepal/China. Stretching across the border of Nepal and China, nature's greatest icon rises to about 29,032 feet, the highest point on Earth, and it is still being pushed upward by tectonic force. The spectacular smoke blowing from the summit is actually deadly jet stream wind tearing across the peak at speeds up to 177 miles per hour. Temperatures here can plunge to minus 76 degrees Fahrenheit, a brutal cold capable of freezing exposed eyes and destroying unprotected fingers in moments. The mountain slopes are wrapped in a chaos of glaciers, grinding against each other, hiding deep crevasses ready to swallow anything forever. The final approach becomes a knife edge of ice only as wide as a footstep, where one slip can mean a free fall beside a drop of about 9,843 feet. This deadly playground of the wealthy can cost between $45,000 and $160,000, while burning about 20,000 calories and stripping away roughly 22 to 33 pounds of body weight along the way. Longyearbyen, Norway. Standing deep in the Arctic world, Longyearbyen is one of the northernmost towns on Earth where people live permanently in an extreme polar environment. The entire settlement sits on permafrost, a layer of frozen ground that can reach more than 300 feet thick and remains frozen throughout the year. During winter, the sun disappears for about 4 months, creating the long polar night when darkness covers the town for weeks. In contrast, summer brings the midnight sun, when daylight continues for 24 hours a day for roughly 4 months. The surrounding landscape has almost no tall trees and is dominated by rock, ice, and tundra plains, with snow-covered mountains rising around the settlement. Against this harsh Arctic setting, houses painted in red, yellow, blue, and orange stand out on the snow, while winter skies often glow with moving green and purple auroras. Dasht Iran. More than just a desert, this giant planetary furnace is one of the hottest places on Earth, with land surface heat recorded at 177.4 degrees Fahrenheit, so extreme that it leaves almost no room for bacteria or mold to endure. With such brutal dryness, it stands among the most sterile landscapes in the world, where life is pushed away and replaced by a deadly kind of perfect beauty. To the east, colossal dunes rise to about 1,640 feet, towering like volcanoes made of sand and defying everything that feels normal about gravity. After about 200,000 years of wind erosion, long walls of sedimentary rock stand upright like an abandoned ancient city, becoming especially unreal at sunset. Winding through the heart of the desert are dry channels coated in white salt crystals, shining like frozen ribbons dropped into a blazing furnace. The planet's burn point reveals itself in fields of jet-black lava, absorbing fierce heat and creating a violent contrast against the surrounding yellow-orange sand. Saltstraumen, Norway. Saltstraumen is not just a strait, but a violent ocean bottleneck where about 400 million cubic meters of seawater are forced through a gap only 490 feet wide every 6 hours, creating one of the strongest tidal currents in the world. The water tears through a channel about 1.9 miles long at speeds near 25 miles per hour, then twists into giant whirlpools up to 33 feet wide and about 16 feet deep, enough to terrify small boats. The frightening part is that this fury repeats 4 times a day, like a perfectly timed machine driven by the tides, with the sea boiling one moment and turning eerily calm the next. Its roar and pull helped feed old Nordic stories of giant sea monsters, and the force of the water is also why this channel is rarely locked in ice, like many other cold northern waters. Spanning that violence is a cantilever concrete bridge about 2,520 feet long, with about 135 feet of clearance above the sea, as if humans tried to hang a thin line over a living whirlpool. That is why Saltstraumen is beautiful in a brutal way, a living tidal engine where sea, wind, and rock come together to show the raw power of nature. Cliffs of Moher, Ireland. Rising like a colossal stone wall above the Atlantic Ocean, the Cliffs of Moher reveal the raw power of nature in one breathtaking coastal landscape. The cliffs stretch for about 9 miles along the shoreline and reach nearly 700 feet at their highest point, making visitors feel as if they are standing on the very edge of a continent. Powerful Atlantic waves continue to erode the rock by a few inches each year, slowly reshaping the cliff edge over time. From the top of the cliffs, the view opens toward an immense ocean that extends for thousands of miles westward before reaching the next continent. Ocean mist often rolls upward across the cliffs while sunset light reflects on the water, turning the entire landscape into glowing shades of orange and red. Around 1 million visitors arrive every year, sharing the cliffs with tens of thousands of seabirds that nest along the towering rock faces. Islas Marietas, a wild group of volcanic islands off the Pacific coast, carries deep historical scars. Yet it has become a surreal wonder where human destruction accidentally created a beauty found almost nowhere else. In the early 20th century, the islands were turned into a bombing range, and those blasts carved giant sinkholes and strange cave mazes into the rock in the middle of the open sea. After Jacques Cousteau led a famous effort to protect the area, the islands slowly recovered and were placed under strict protection in a national park covering about 3,212 acres before later receiving UNESCO recognition. To reach the hidden beach inside a round sinkhole that looks like the eye of the island, visitors must swim through a tunnel about 66 feet long when the tide is low, entering a space so quiet it feels cut off from the outside world. The islands are not only geologically strange, but also one of the rare places where blue-footed boobies stand out with glowing blue feet on grey volcanic rock, while humpback whales add even more drama with their winter leaps nearby. And with only about 116 visitors allowed to enter each day, this silent island sanctuary stands as a powerful example of nature's ability to heal itself in extraordinary ways. Tanah Barak Beach, Indonesia. Like a giant slash cut through the side of a mountain, the road to this beach feels as if the earth has been split open by a god right before your eyes. On both sides rise limestone walls, about 131 feet high, cut so roughly that the people and vehicles below look as small as ants. The strongest visual impact comes from the sharp contrast between the white rock, the dark strip of asphalt in the middle, and the bright blue sea waiting at the end of the road. For centuries, the beautiful beach behind this rock wall was completely sealed off until the road was opened in late 2022. In contrast to the claustrophobic cliff passage, the beach beyond still feels untouched and quiet, with exposed coral reefs and white waves crashing against the rocky shore. That contrast between split cliffs and the open blue sea is what makes Tanah Barak Beach so striking and unforgettable. Centralia, Pennsylvania, USA. In 1962, a trash fire in an open pit mine let flames spread quietly into the coal seam below, and over time, it turned this place into a ghost town. From there, the fire spread underground across nearly 1 square mile, moving through tunnels as deep as about 295 feet, and continuing to burn for decades. The heat below cracked the ground open, sending out white smoke and toxic gas, while nearby, patches of land were baked into a pale grey dead zone. The abandoned highway cutting through the town was also warped by the heat and covered in graffiti, making it look like a ruin from the end of the world. It took nearly 20 years for the government to admit that the town could not be saved, and about $42 million was spent to relocate residents and tear down hundreds of homes. Even with rusted warning signs about deadly collapse and poisonous gas, tens of thousands of curious visitors still come each year to see this land burning from below. Cuatro Ciénegas. In the burning basin of the Chihuahuan Desert, The Valley of Four Marshes appears like a geological contradiction, with turquoise pools resting between sharp limestone mountains. NASA sees this land almost like a space laboratory because it echoes conditions from early Earth and may also help scientists understand possible environments on Mars. From there, the strongest impression comes from the clear turquoise pools that suddenly appear across the dry brown ground, creating a visual shock that is hard to forget. You may be even more amazed by the brilliant white gypsum dunes shining like snow under heat of about 104 degrees Fahrenheit, in one of the only 3 places on Earth with this rare kind of pure sand. At the bottom of the clear pools lie stromatolites about 3.5 billion years old, living fossils that still remain like memories from the dawn of life. And when you walk through the white dunes under a deep red sunset, the whole place can feel less like Earth and more like a personal journey across another planet. Abuna Ye Matagu, Ethiopia. Perched on a sandstone pillar in a dry and barren land, this place of worship feels like a fortress of faith hanging in the sky. To reach it, people must climb by a way and across a steep rock wall at more than 8,200 feet, placing their feet on tiny holes with no safety equipment at all. Inside the rock chamber are ancient frescoes from around the 15th century, still bright and vivid as if the paint had only just dried. What makes it even more extraordinary is that for centuries, from elderly people to mothers carrying children, worshippers have still made this climb as an act of complete faith. Around it, there are no gentle hills, only towering red stone pillars rising from a desert landscape, creating a view that feels both majestic and frightening. Carved from the rock since the 5th century, this sacred place also holds the bones of ancient monks who chose to remain there forever high above the ground. Barrancas del Cobre, The ghostly copper-green color covering these volcanic cliffs, formed about 30 million years ago, is actually a visual trick made by lichen, making this vast canyon system of about 25,100 square miles look like a living maze that changes with the light. Over millions of years, 6 major rivers kept cutting through the land and left behind towering rock walls that seemed to run without end. In the middle of that harsh landscape, the Raramuri people remain deeply connected to the land and are famous for running about 124 miles across dangerous terrain in thin rubber sandals. Because the region is so difficult and extreme, it took people 90 years to complete the railway, which passes through 86 tunnels and crosses 37 steel bridges above deep chasms. And when you rush at about 84 miles per hour along a zip line nearly 2 miles long, you truly feel how small you are inside this enormous bowl of Earth. Mir, Russia. Once the most powerful diamond mine in the world, this giant funnel produced as much as 10 million carats a year and became a massive source of wealth for an entire nation. The mine was discovered in 1955 and worked in brutal permafrost, where crews once used jet engines and explosives to break the frozen ground. The pit is about 1,722 feet deep and 3,900 feet wide, so huge that the spiral roads around its walls look like a road leading down into hell. Its enormous scale, violent mining history, and cold, isolated setting are what make Mir one of the most haunting, man-made pits on Earth. Mar de Cortés. The blazing desert of Mexico was suddenly split open by an ocean crack formed about 5 million years ago, creating one of the youngest, narrowest, and strangest seas on Earth. That violent birth turned this place into the world's aquarium, a rare biological sanctuary that supports nearly 40% of the world's marine mammal species. More than that, it is a migration route for giant whales, and one of the only places where thousands of mobula rays can leap about 10 feet into the air like seabirds above the water. At the surface, the landscape feels like a violent collision, with giant cactus stands and burning red desert slopes falling almost directly into bright turquoise water, making the whole scene look like another planet. But beneath that beauty lies an even deeper and harsher world, with waters deeper than 10,000 feet, mysterious hydrothermal vents on the seafloor, and northern tides that can rise about 30 feet in only a few hours. Once called the Red Sea because algal blooms could turn the water the color of blood, this UNESCO site stands as living proof that even in the middle of a harsh desert, life can still explode with astonishing force. Prismas basalticos. Few places look like a geometric drawing made by a volcano in the middle of nature, where thousands of polygonal basalt columns fit together like a giant stone honeycomb. This wonder formed about 2.5 million years ago, when lava cooled slowly, shrank, and cracked along very straight lines, creating rock columns with almost perfect 5- or 6-sided shapes. That is why the walls, rising about 100 to 164 feet high, look like countless giant pencils pushed straight into the canyon, creating a very powerful visual effect. The basalt also changes its look clearly, because when it is dry, it appears rough and dark gray, but when wet, it turns glossy black like onyx and reflects the light in a magical way. Across that surface, white waterfalls fall directly over the tops of the columns, slip through the cracks, and create echoing sounds like water dancing on giant piano keys. Perhaps it is this rare mix of precise geology, striking visual beauty, and the softness of water that made this place one of the 13 natural wonders of Mexico. Cañón del Sumidero. The blue sky above suddenly narrows into only a thin ribbon when you enter this 35-million-year-old slash that the Grijalva River carved deep into limestone. As you move farther inside, the rock walls rise almost straight up to about 3,300 feet, making the whole place feel like a giant natural fortress closing in around you. In the middle of that harsh scenery, a rare geological wonder appears on the cliff, like a giant Christmas tree, shaped over thousands of years by moss and mineral-rich water. Since the downstream dam was completed, the water inside the canyon has become deeper and calmer, turning the entire space into a world that feels both beautiful and surreal. Because of that, the journey past caves glowing with mineral colors and through sharp bends often feels as if the massive cliffs are pressing down right above your head. And in that eerie stillness, crocodiles about 16 feet long resting on the mud make this abyss feel both enchanting and unsettling at the same time. Fraser Island, Kagari, Australia. Like a living contradiction, this island is made entirely of sand, yet it supports a dense rainforest ecosystem, which is why it is known as the largest sand island in the world. Stretching about 76 miles, it is also famous for freshwater lakes perched on sand, so clear that they seem unreal and holding almost no aquatic life. There are no paved roads on the island, and its giant sand dunes still keep moving, slowly burying even ancient forests that stand in their way. On the eastern shore lies the wreck of a former hospital ship from the First World War, thrown onto land by a cyclone in 1935, and now left as a rusting steel skeleton. The island's former name was linked to a shipwreck in 1836. An event that marked the beginning of a dark chapter for the indigenous people of this land. Even though its beaches look beautiful, the surrounding ocean is extremely dangerous because of rip currents, sharks, and deadly box jellyfish, making a simple swim a serious risk. Monsell Sea Forts, United Kingdom. Standing alone in a cold sea and thick grey fog, these giant steel structures look like war machines wading toward the shore. They were designed by Guy Monsell during the Second World War to shoot down bombers and stop enemy aircraft from laying mines before reaching the mainland. After being abandoned in the 1950s, the forts were taken over by pirate radio operators in the 1960s and turned into loud offshore stations blasting rock and roll beyond normal government control. Even more bizarre, one of them was seized and turned into a self-declared micronation, complete with passports, coins, and years of strange legal disputes. Nearly a century without real maintenance has left the steel eaten by salt, the walkways rotten, the windows hollow, and the whole structure looking like the rusted skeleton of a dead wartime world. You cannot buy a ticket to climb them because the stairways are rusted through and broken, so tours can only take speedboats weaving beneath the legs while visitors stare up from the edge of the waves. Gardar B A64, Iceland. Tilted on a black beach, this giant steel wreck looks like a sea monster thrown ashore and left behind. It was built in 1912, the same year the Titanic was launched, but this ship survived for nearly 70 years as a notorious whaling machine. In 1981, when whaling was restricted and the ship no longer had value, it was deliberately run aground and abandoned on the shore. And before becoming a rusting wreck, it was known as Globe 4. The thick steel, once used to break ice, has now been eaten into red, orange, and dark brown rust, while shattered windows and bent beams make it look like a giant metal skeleton. This wreck is not silent, because when strong sea winds blow through its empty rooms, they create groans and creaks, like the crying of an old machine, being consumed by nature day after day. Its bloody history, abandoned death, and ruined shape in the cold landscape are what make Gardar BA64 feel like a post-apocalyptic monument to the age of ocean exploitation. Haidashan, China. Hidden deep inside the vast gravel desert of the Qaidam Basin in Qinghai, China, this place is one of the most mysterious, desolate, and darkly beautiful landscapes on Earth. The whole area covers about 46 square miles and is formed by pale white or light yellow sand underneath a surface of black gravel. So from a distance, the entire place looks like a giant three-dimensional ink painting. Streams of golden sand run through the black surface like waterfalls that dried up long ago, and at sunrise or sunset, the contrast between black and white becomes even stronger, making the mountain look both surreal and threatening. Although it looks like a solid mass of black stone, the outer surface is actually very fragile and easy to break, which is why the site has been managed more strictly since 2025, with special visitor zones and raised wooden walkways to protect the ground. The landscape shows almost no sign of life, with no trees, no birds, and no insects, so its total silence feels both suffocating and strangely attractive. Its desolation, its world reduced almost entirely to black, white, and blue sky, and the feeling of walking on a moon on Earth are what make Haidushan one of the most surreal and haunting places in China. Hunza Valley, Pakistan. Set deep between towering mountain walls, this valley sits at about 8,000 feet below snowy peaks rising higher than 22,966 feet, making the whole place feel like the bottom of a giant well of rock and ice. On the steep slopes, generations of people carved out terraced fields that cling to the mountainsides, while below them run turquoise or milky white rivers that make the landscape look even more unusual. The scenery changes sharply with the seasons, as spring glows with pink and white blossom from cherry and apricot trees, while autumn burns with yellow and orange against snow and a deep blue sky. Hunza is also known as the home of a community famous for strength, endurance, and very long life. Its water mostly comes from melting ice, and daily food often centers on whole barley, fruit, and apricot kernels, while meat appears only rarely during the year. To reach this place, people must travel a dangerous mountain road where falling rocks can strike without warning. Yet once inside the valley, all sense of hurry seems to disappear. Veryovkina Cave, Abkhazia/Georgia. From what looks like only a small opening in the mountain, this abyss drops more than 7,257 feet, making it the deepest cave ever explored by humans. Inside, it keeps changing from huge chambers to narrow, wet cracks so tight that explorers sometimes have to remove gear just to squeeze through. Because there is no flat ground to rest on, they must sleep in hanging tents fixed directly into vertical rock walls. The greatest danger is water, which can rise very fast after rain and turn the deep passages into deadly flood traps. After more than 50 years of continuous exploration, this anti-tourism forbidden place has not only challenged people, but also taken the life of the diver honored in its name. Hierve el Agua. The white ribbons hanging along the mountainside are actually a rare visual illusion where time has turned mineral-rich flow into hard limestone that looks like a frozen waterfall. That slow build-up over thousands of years from underground springs, heavily loaded with calcium carbonate, is what created this wonder and made it one of only 2 places on Earth with petrified waterfalls. Even though its name means boiling water, the pools are not hot at all, because the bubbles come only from carbon dioxide escaping through cracks in the rock, while the water stays cool at about 72 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit. At the edge of a cliff about 164 feet high, turquoise pools sit beside the drop and create the feeling of an infinity pool floating between earth and sky. Just above them, a water channel system more than 2,500 years old still survives, showing that the ancient Zapotec had already learned how to guide and use these mineral waters. And because those springs are still flowing today, this stone waterfall keeps growing even now, standing out like a living white band against the dark green mountains around it. La Rinconada, Peru. Rising near the edge of the stratosphere at more than 16,700 feet, La Rinconada is the highest settlement on Earth, and one of the harshest places to live. Instead of solid homes, it is a maze of thousands of rusted metal shacks clinging to freezing mountain slopes. La Rinconada is known as a huge and nearly lawless gold camp, where many miners gamble their lives inside a deeply exploitative system of work. With no real sewage system, garbage and human waste freeze into large piles and mix with toxic mercury from gold processing. At night, the faint lights from the dark mine entrances make the mountainside look as if it is being watched by the eyes of a stone monster. With an average life expectancy of only about 45 years, this place stands as a brutal image of the price people pay for a shining metal. Annapurna, Nepal. Towering at 26,545 feet, this massif is not only among the 10 highest mountains on Earth, but is also infamous for a bloody climbing history that once made it one of the deadliest peaks on the planet. It is not a single mountain at all, but a massive mountain system, strong enough to block weather and create two completely different worlds, one wet and green, the other dry and cold like a high desert. At its base lie rhododendron forests and green valleys, but higher up the cliffs become steeper and the hanging ice more unstable, turning the mountain into a place where avalanches and collapsing ice can strike at any moment. This massif also holds a special place in history because it was the first mountain above 26,247 feet ever climbed by humans in 1950, although the climbers paid a terrible price with severe frostbite after surviving storms and losing their way. Hidden inside the massif is a giant glacial basin surrounded by snow walls rising above 23,000 feet, making people feel as if they are standing at the bottom of a vast arena made of ice and stone. To truly feel the scale of Annapurna, people often walk a full circuit of about 99 to 143 miles, and that journey is exactly what has made it one of the most majestic and haunting trekking routes in the world. Minqin County, China. Trapped between two giant deserts, this oasis feels like the last line of defense, trying to stop two seas of sand from becoming one. It is a violent sandstorm machine that can lift millions of tons of yellow dust, block out the sun, and sweep straight toward major cities. To protect their land, local people planted straw by hand in millions of square grids across the sand, creating vast, checkerboard barriers that slow the wind and hold moisture. Along the edge of the oasis, many old earthen houses and walls have already been half buried by sand, giving the area the look of a post-apocalyptic world. To save this land, water has even been brought in from far away, as if giving new blood to an oasis slowly running out of strength. Guatemala City Sinkhole, Guatemala. Striking with brutal force in the middle of a crowded city, this black abyss opened and swallowed an entire 3-story factory in a single moment. With a width of about 66 feet and a near vertical drop of 98 feet, its walls looked so smooth and perfectly round that some people even imagined an alien laser had carved it. The most disturbing part was that when people looked down into the hole, the building was gone, because the violent collapse and underground water had crushed the debris and dragged it into the hidden cavities below. The area was later sealed and paved over, so today it looks like an ordinary road, hiding one of the most terrifying urban collapses ever recorded. Simeon Mountains. From a distance, this place looks like a giant stone chessboard hanging in the clouds, and it also serves as the last stronghold of the Ethiopian wolf, the Walia ibex, and rare troops of Gelada monkeys. But the most shocking part is that you can be walking across a green plateau, and then with one more step, the ground suddenly falls away into cliffs thousands of feet deep. Far below, the landscape is torn into countless dark towers and sharp pinnacles rising like giant spears pointed back toward the sky. On those cold, high slopes, giant lobelia plants reaching about 33 feet stand alone in the wind, making the whole range feel like another planet. The scene becomes even more alive because of the thousands of gelada monkeys with bright red, heart-shaped patches on their chests, running and sleeping on narrow ledges as if the abyss did not exist. And to reach that beauty, you must force yourself across hanging trails only about 16 inches wide, where the fear of the drop below becomes real in every step. Aiken Spring, China. In the middle of a dry and empty landscape, Aiken Spring appears like a giant red eye, staring at the sky, earning the nickname, the Devil's Eye. The central core measures about 33 feet across, where mineral-rich water filled with sulfur and heavy elements constantly rises from underground and looks as if it is boiling. In reality, the water does not reach the boiling point, and the white bubbles are caused by strong underground gas pressure pushing upward from deep below the Earth's crust. Around the dark center, layers of minerals such as iron and sulfur form yellow, brick red, and brown rings that closely resemble the iris of a living eye. Because the mineral concentration is extremely high, the water becomes dangerous for birds and wild animals that approach it for drinking. The surrounding land is heavily oxidized and stained with rust colors, expanding outward to complete the image of a massive eye set in the desert. Church of St. George. Instead of looking up at domes, here you have to look down at a castle resting inside a stone pit about 39 feet deep, shaped like an almost perfect cross. The whole church is a single block carved directly from iron-rich volcanic rock, so its red color is the true color of the stone and has lasted for more than 800 years. Built under King Lalibela in the 12th century, it was a bold effort to create a new Jerusalem in the heart of Africa. Ancient engineers also designed the roof and drainage channels with great precision, helping the church survive rain and erosion for centuries. Around it, narrow trenches and tunnels cut through red volcanic tuff, where the stone, lichen, and white robes of priests come together in a scene that feels deeply ancient. But the most remarkable part is that religious rituals have continued here for more than 8 centuries, making the whole stone structure feel as if it is still alive with time. Omo Valley. Stripped of every illusion about the civilized world, this valley remains a place where humans and wild animals still live by the oldest rules of survival. At its heart runs a rushing mud-red river that brings fertile life, but also hides giant crocodiles up to about 20 feet long under the dark water. That same river also makes the landscape change violently with the seasons, turning the land into cracked red dust in the dry months and then into a green maze of wetlands in the rains. In that harsh world, the human body becomes the most important monument, marked with raised scars and clay lip plates as wide as about 6 to 8 inches. To be accepted as adults, boys must leap across the backs of cattle, while women endure bloody lashes to prove strength and devotion. But this wild way of life, shaped over thousands of years, now faces the danger of disappearing as massive dams begin to change the rhythm of the whole valley. Bale Mountains. In the middle of hot Africa, this place appears like a frozen kingdom hanging in the clouds, wild, isolated, and beautiful in a way that feels almost unreal. It is also the last refuge of several rare animals found only in Ethiopia, especially the Ethiopian wolf and huge spiral-horned antelope. But this range does not protect life only for itself, because it works like a giant sponge that gathers mist and rain, then feeds more than 40 rivers that support over 12 million people in the dry lands below. What makes it even stranger is that in one short journey, the land can change completely, from freezing alpine grassland to dark, wet cloud forest so dense that even the light seems to disappear. On that cold grey plateau, giant lobelia plants rising about 39 feet stand in the mist like antennas from another planet, while glacial tarns rest like blue eyes of the earth. That mix of harsh altitude, life-giving water, and animals found nowhere else is what makes this one of the most important and surreal landscapes in Africa. Cenote dos Ojos. Giant eyes in the earth open into an underground passage stretching about 216 miles, where the line between the world above and the darkness below seems to disappear. The water here is so clear that divers can see more than 328 feet ahead, making many of them feel as if they are floating through open air instead of swimming. Beneath water that stays around 75 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit lie forests of stalactites millions of years old, proof that this cave was once dry before it was flooded. When sunlight breaks through the cave ceiling, it forms glowing beams like underwater lasers, then reflects off silver air pockets hanging above to create a space that feels visually reversed. As you move deeper, you pass through the mysterious halocline, where fresh water meets salt water, and suddenly everything turns blurry, as if you have stepped through a door in time. Perhaps that pure but haunting beauty is why the ancient Maya saw this place as an entrance to Xibalba, and even now it still draws people in like an underworld shaped by darkness. Fassel Gebi. Lost in the windy Ethiopian highlands, this fortress appears like a European night legend placed strangely in Africa in the 17th century. For nearly 250 years, during the brightest age of the Gonda dynasty, it saw more than 10 emperors rise and fall behind its cold stone walls. A massive wall almost 3,000 feet long surrounds a rare mix of Indian, Arab, and Baroque architecture, creating a look found almost nowhere else. Its wild beauty becomes even stronger, where ancient sycamore roots, like giant pythons, slowly tighten around the arches and old stone walls. Like an old wounded warrior, the fortress still carries scars from bombing during the Second World War, making its history feel painfully real. And as you pass through its 12 unsettling stone gates, you begin to feel the weight of an old empire where every step seems to touch the edge of absolute power. Axum Stelae Obelisks. In the middle of a dry highland, this place appears like a forest of stone, where giant granite blocks rise like signs of an empire turned into rock. Each stela here was carved from a single block weighing hundreds of tons, hauled from far away and raised with a technique that still amazes people today. What feels strange is that the stone does not show gods or people, but multi-story buildings with windows, doors, and false floors carved in careful detail. Those monuments once stood as a statement of the power of Axum, one of the four great powers of the ancient world. But the most shocking sight is the fallen stela of more than 500 tons, broken on the ground like a warning that even the greatest ambition can fail under gravity. And beneath that field of stone lie royal tombs and dark passageways, making the whole place feel both grand and unsettling, like the entrance to a vanished empire. Debre Damo Monastery. Instead of walking through a gate, to reach this sacred place, you must cling to a rope made of cowhide and pull yourself up a cliff almost 49 feet high. Because it stands on top of a flat mountain with steep sides on every edge, the monastery looks like a stone island floating in the mist of the Ethiopian highlands. Inside that isolation stands one of the oldest churches in Ethiopia, still preserving the monkey head building style, where wooden beams are locked between layers of stone to survive time and earthquakes for centuries. On the summit, the monks also carved huge reservoirs into the basalt to collect rainwater, creating a small world able to survive by itself among rock and wind. And when you stand at that final border between earth and sky, with clouds drifting at eye level and all human noise far below in the abyss, you can feel the near total silence of this place. Grand Renaissance Dam. This giant hydroelectric dam, worth about $5 billion, does more than hold water and produce power, because it also carries the rising ambition of an entire nation and some of the fiercest geopolitical tension on the continent. The massive gravity wall used more than 13 million cubic yards of concrete and relies on its brutal weight to imprison about 82 billion tons of water, creating pressure so immense that it can bend the Earth's crust in the surrounding region. The dam itself is a roller-compacted concrete gravity wall, stretching nearly 1 mile across a dry canyon, turning the land behind it into a vast artificial lake that is slowly swallowing hundreds of miles of once burned and barren valley. What makes the project globally sensitive is that it stands on the river, supplying most of the Nile's water, while also trapping millions of tons of fertile silt, meaning the rich downstream delta lands may lose their most valuable natural fertilizer forever. By tightening its grip on the river's original flow, this hydroelectric plant can generate enough electricity for 60 million people, and it is also one of the rare dams protected by advanced air defense missile systems. Rejected by international financiers who feared it could ignite war, this colossal structure was built from public donations and the squeezed monthly wages of tens of millions of poor citizens. Cascadas de Agua Azul. Deep in the forests of Chiapas, a brilliant blue ribbon appears like a chemical illusion, instantly breaking every normal idea people have about the color of water. From there, the river spreads through dozens of cascading levels, creating liquid pyramids that pour into natural infinity pools formed over tens of thousands of years. That intense emerald blue comes from extremely high levels of calcium carbonate and magnesium, making the whole river act like a giant prism that keeps only its brightest blue light. But this water is not only beautiful, because it can also seem to turn things into stone by slowly coating roots and fallen wood with hard limestone, leaving natural sculptures in the current. Even so, the landscape never stays the same, becoming crystal clear in the dry season and then shifting into a fierce reddish-brown when rain and sediment take over. Because of that changing and mysterious beauty, the ancient Maya saw these waters as sacred, believing they could cleanse the soul and hold the deep power of time itself. Blue Nile Falls. Tearing through the dry highlands, this giant wall of water, about 1,312 feet wide, crashes down about 148 feet, with enough force to crush anything in its path. Local people call it smoking water because the torrent slams into basalt rock with such violence that thick mist rises back into the air like smoke. That nearly constant mist also creates a cool green strip around the rim, standing out against the otherwise dry highland landscape. More than just a dramatic waterfall, it carries millions of tons of soil from the plateau and provides about 85% of the water and fertile silt for the entire Nile system. But when hydropower holds back the flow in the dry season, the falls can shrink and reveal black, jagged basalt walls like the teeth of a sleeping monster. Tia. Standing in the middle of an empty grassland, Tia appears like a mysterious graveyard, with 36 volcanic stone pillars set in a line more than 148 feet long, like a spiritual wall guarding the dead. What makes it even more unsettling is that scientists still remain almost helpless, because apart from these stones reaching about 16 feet high, they have found no clear city, writing, or other strong trace of the people who created them. On the stone surfaces are strange symbols that no one has fully decoded, and the most striking of them are swords pointing upward, suggesting a society deeply marked by war and violence. The feeling grows darker when you learn that most of the bodies buried below, curled in a fetal position, belonged to very young people between about 18 and 30 years old. That is why Tia has become one of the rare World Heritage sites that forces people to admit how little they know about time, because an entire power once existed here and almost completely vanished, leaving behind only stone ghosts. Lake Tana appears as the green heart of Ethiopia, a vast lake that not only sustains life, but also holds deep meaning for the entire Horn of Africa. Beyond that geographic importance, the lake holds around 37 islands, and many of them shelter ancient Orthodox monasteries built in remote positions to protect sacred relics and precious manuscripts. Upon that historical and geological setting, papyrus boats known as tankwa still move quietly across the lake, making the scene feel as if part of the ancient world has never disappeared. On calm days, the surface becomes as smooth as a mirror and reflects the full blue sky, making it feel less like an ordinary lake and more like a fragile boundary between earth and heaven. Reserva de la Biosfera de la Mariposa Monarca. Every winter, more than 138,000 acres of high mountain forest in Mexico welcome millions of monarch butterflies after a journey of over 2,500 miles from North America. What is astonishing is that many of them have never been here before, yet they still find the same Oyamel fir trees above about 9,800 feet to survive the cold season. When they cover the trunks and branches, they turn the forest into thick layers of orange-gray, and some trees hold more than 20,000 butterflies until the branches bend under the weight. Once the morning sun warms the air, the whole forest seems to wake up as millions of butterflies rise together in an orange storm through the mountain mist. If you stay quiet, you can even hear their wings making a soft sound like light rain, giving the place a feeling that is both surreal and sacred. Perhaps that is also why, because they return in early November, local culture has long seen these butterflies as the spirits of the dead coming back. Geralta. Geralta rises like a giant stone fortress across the Ethiopian highlands, with towering red and orange mountains that look overwhelming at first sight. It stands about 8,200 feet above sea level and is made mainly of red sandstone, about 200 million years old. Over millions of years, wind and water shaped it into flat-topped peaks and cliffs that rise almost straight upward. What makes it special is that the religious buildings here were not built on the rock, but carved directly into it. Because of that, reaching these sacred places often means climbing steep rock walls with bare hands. This blend of fiery mountains, harsh altitude, and churches hidden inside stone is why it is often called the Petra of Ethiopia. Karakum Desert, Turkmenistan. Covering nearly 70% of the country, this desert of about 135,136 square miles is not only a vast sea of sand, but also hides a famous fire crater that has burned for decades. The crater appeared after a drilling accident in 1971, when toxic gas escaped and people set it on fire to stop the spread, but the flames never went out. The crater is about 226 feet wide and 98 feet deep, and as you get closer, the silence of the desert is replaced by a powerful roar rising from the burning ground. Around it, dark sand lies beside dry white salt flats, creating a sharp contrast between sand, salt, and fire. The name Black Sands does not come from the color of the dunes, but from the darker soil below and the withered desert shrubs, which make the whole region look like a dark sea from afar. To bring life into this harsh land, people also dug a canal about 855 miles long across the desert, deeply changing the environment around it. Norilsk, Russia. Bound in the tundra, about 186 miles north of the Arctic Circle, this closed city feels like a devil's forge, producing about 40% of the world's palladium. Norilsk was built from 1935 with forced labor from the Gulag system, and Norilsk records say 16,806 prisoners died here from hunger, cold, and brutal work. The giant concrete apartment blocks had to be lifted on steel piles driven into permafrost, as deep as about 1,640 feet to survive the sinking ground. Acid rain has torn the surrounding vegetation into a grey graveyard, and at times industrial waste has even stained nearby rivers a terrifying blood red. The climate is so merciless that the streets are almost completely free of homeless people, because only a few hours outside in winter can freeze a person to death. Even with the bleak and damaged look of an isolated industrial city, the black sky above it sometimes erupts with ghostly auroras dancing over blazing smokestacks in a scene that feels both beautiful and frightening. Talicho Lake, Nepal. Suspended at 16,138 feet, this lake appears like a giant turquoise jewel in the sky, where dazzling beauty always comes with danger. The lake is nearly 3 miles long, about 1 mile wide, and as deep as 279 feet, set inside a world almost stripped of all green life, leaving only blue water, dark grey rock, and blinding white ice. The route to reach it is famous for steep scree slopes and landslide-prone trails, where every step demands care, because one slip can send a person straight toward the abyss. Fed by glacier melt, the water glows with an unusually rich blue color, and from late autumn into spring, the lake often freezes over and turns into a silent, unnerving sheet of cold. For many Hindu pilgrims, this is also believed to be a sacred lake linked to the Ramayana, which is why some people accept the dangerous mountain route just to stand beside its water. Its extreme altitude, unreal color, unstable trail, and deep spiritual meaning are what make Tilico Lake one of the most beautiful and frightening lakes in the Himalayas. Lop Nur, China. Marked on the earth like a giant human ear listening to the universe, this wandering lake of about 1,158 square miles has now fully evaporated, leaving behind a sterile and lifeless dead zone. Once erased from public maps, this deathland endured 45 secret nuclear weapons tests, leaving radioactive craters like scars that never truly disappear. At its center lies an ocean of salt, hardened like steel, covered with sharp crystals that can tear open tires, while beneath parts of the surface hide thick salt mud traps, ready to swallow any careless step. Over millions of years, wind and storms carved the place into a devilish maze of cliffs and strange stone pillars, and the whistling air through the cracks sounds like mourning from a buried ghost city. This sea of death not only steals direction through magnetic anomalies and broken navigation systems, but has also become an unmarked grave for reckless expeditions that entered and never returned. Even today, you cannot simply buy a ticket to go there because reaching the core requires special security permission and a convoy of off-road vehicles worth millions of dollars just to survive the journey. Teotihuacan, a giant city that once glowed deep red under the sun, now survives only as an enormous ruin, where its unknown builders disappeared and left behind almost no writing at all. In the 5th century, this place may have held about 200,000 people, and its scale was so overwhelming that when the Aztecs saw it, they believed it was the place where humans became gods. The skyline is ruled by the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon, two massive structures rising like artificial mountains, with the Pyramid of the Sun reaching about 213 feet high. The backbone of the city is a stepped avenue about 131 feet wide and nearly 2 miles long, creating the feeling of a giant stone stairway leading straight into the sky. Around that central axis stand more than 2,000 apartment compounds arranged like a mathematical grid, so precise that even a natural river was redirected to flow in line with the city's order. Then, after a devastating fire around the 8th century, the empire collapsed and left behind a silent legacy that still challenges modern ideas about the power and engineering of the ancient world. Sikkim and Tashigang, India. On the barren slopes of the Himalayas, Sikkim and Tashigang sit at more than 15,000 feet, appearing like lonely islands in a sea of cloud, where people still hold on in an extremely harsh environment. The landscape here is a cold desert with almost no tall trees, only red-brown, ochre, and dusty grey slopes, along with whitewashed mud houses with flat roofs clinging to the hillsides to resist snow and wind. This place is especially famous for having the world's highest post office at about 14,600 feet and the highest polling station on Earth at about 15,300 feet, to the point that government workers must carry oxygen cylinders while doing their jobs. Winter here is extremely severe, with temperatures dropping from about -22 degrees Fahrenheit to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, so people can grow only hardy barley and peas during the short 4-month thaw. Because of the permafrost and the rock-hard ground, burial is almost impossible, and yaks are not only used for carrying loads, because their dried dung is also placed on rooftops and used as fuel to keep homes warm through the long winter. Even under such brutal conditions, many people still come here to send a postcard as a special milestone and to see with their own eyes how human life can endure at the far edge of cloud and snow. Boyi Village, China. Trapped in the heart of a sea of death, Boyi is an almost invisible village, lying about 155 miles deep inside an ocean of sand, where brutal temperatures can swing from about -22 degrees Fahrenheit to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Cut off from the outside world for 4 centuries, its people survived in rough shelters built from dry wood, desert mud, and even sheep dung to endure the bitter cold. Around them stands a maze of pyramid-shaped dunes, rising to about 1,000 feet, always ready to swallow the golden poplar forests, clinging weakly beside a dying river. To reach this lonely oasis, a traveler must cross about 155 miles of soft, trackless sand, where a single-engine failure can turn the journey into a death sentence in the desert. Each year, the region suffers up to 200 days of blinding sandstorms that can hide the sun, and even with such astonishing endurance, the cruel loss of water is slowly turning this primitive settlement into a silent ruin of the past. Chichen Itza, an ancient supercity covering about 4 square miles, lies hidden in the forests of Yucatan, appearing like a giant stone computer built by the Maya to move in harmony with the universe. At the heart of this wonder stands the stepped pyramid, with a total of 365 steps. And on the spring and autumn equinoxes, sunlight creates the illusion of a giant serpent crawling down to the ground. In another part of the city, thousands of square stone columns stand in perfect rows across a vast plaza, and each one is carved with the image of a warrior, pointing a weapon. Even the ancient ball court was built with a strange acoustic effect, where a soft voice can travel far, and every match was tied to a haunting act of sacrifice. And because the city stood on limestone land, with almost no surface rivers, the deep blue sinkholes became sources of water, gateways to the underworld, and places where offerings were given to the gods. It is this mix of scale, mathematics, astronomy, and belief that helped the site become one of the new 7 wonders of the world in 2007, and also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Konso Cultural Landscape, Ethiopia, appears like a kingdom of stone steps, where people turned dry hillsides into living farmland through patience and hard work. For more than 400 years, local communities have stacked millions of stones to hold soil and water on steep slopes. What makes it remarkable is that these walls were built entirely with dry stone technique, without any mortar, yet they have remained strong through time. Within a landscape of brown earth, grey stone, and dry straw, the tall pointed thatched houses look simple but perfectly adapted to harsh sun and rain. Because of that, this is not only an ancient farming land, but also proof that humans can overcome difficult terrain with skill and effort. The whole place, therefore, feels like a giant monument built not by machines, but by the hands of many generations. Harena Forest, Ethiopia, feels like a hidden kingdom of mist in the Ethiopian highlands, where darkness, wet moss, and ancient trees combine into a world that seems far removed from time. Covering about 1,545 square miles, it is considered the largest remaining Afro-montane forest in Ethiopia and stretches along the southern slopes of the Bale Mountains. That isolation has also helped make it one of the rare places on Earth where Arabica coffee still grows naturally beneath old forest canopy, while many plants and animals have evolved in their own distinct way. Deeper in Bide, huge trees are draped with hanging lichens like silver beards, and the forest floor is so heavily covered in moss that sound seems to disappear into it. During the wetter season, dense mist often blankets the forest, making even very short distances feel blurred and uncertain. Because of all this, the whole place feels less like an ordinary forest and more like a quiet, primordial realm still living by its own rules. Wenchi Crater Lake, Ethiopia, feels like a hidden paradise in the Ethiopian highlands, where an extinct volcano holds a lake, forest, and hot springs inside one vast basin. Because it stands at about 11,089 feet above sea level, the whole place feels set apart from the outside world. Inside the crater, the lake is fed by rain and underground springs, which keep the water deep blue and clear. Small islands rest on the surface, and one is linked to an old monastery, giving the landscape both beauty and spiritual meaning. To reach the water, people must walk or ride horses down long zigzag trails, so the journey feels slow and remote. Because a blue lake, hot springs, waterfalls, and steep slopes all exist inside one extinct volcano, it is seen as one of the most peaceful and dreamlike places in Ethiopia. Mount Roraima, Venezuela, Brazil, Guyana. Mount Roraima rises like a giant stone fortress, with a vast, flat summit, making it one of the most unusual mountains on Earth. The mountain is a tepui with a tabletop summit covering about 12 square miles, an area similar to a small city. The rock that forms this mountain is estimated to be between 2 billion years old, placing it among the oldest exposed geological formations on the planet. Surrounding the plateau are nearly vertical cliffs, ranging from about 1,300 feet to more than 3,300 feet high, forming a massive natural wall. Thick clouds often wrap around the sides of the mountain, making the summit appear like an island floating above the sky. Because the plateau remained isolated for millions of years, many unique plants evolved here, leading scientists to describe Mount Roraima as a natural laboratory of evolution. Uros Floating Islands, Peru/Bolivia. More than 1,000 years ago, fleeing the violence of the Inca Empire, a resilient people gave up solid ground and wove an entire civilization to float above the deep waters of Lake Titicaca. From the island floor to the houses and boats, almost everything here is made from totora reeds layered over floating root blocks about 4 to 8 feet thick, like a giant living mattress. The ground beneath your feet is actually rotting all the time, so fresh reeds must be spread every 15 to 20 days to keep the island from sinking. Even with constant repair, a reed island lasts only about 30 years before waste and decay drag it downward, forcing the whole community to weave its territory again from nothing. These floating islands are anchored to the lake bed with ropes and stakes, yet they can still be moved when needed, like drifting villages built to protect themselves. Over all of it hangs a fierce contrast between the bright gold of sun-dried reeds and the dark blue-black depth of the vast lake. Lake Turkana. Lost in a burning desert, Lake Turkana appears like a giant jade sea, and it is also the largest alkaline lake on Earth, with a surface area of about 2,473 square miles. The land around the lake is also seen as one of the most important cradles of humankind, where many ancient fossils, millions of years old, have been discovered. The water shines with a beautiful jade color, but because the salt and alkaline levels are so high, people can hardly drink it. In the middle of the lake, volcanic islands still seem to breathe, with craters rising through winds of about 31 miles per hour, making the whole scene feel like another planet. At sunset, the lake becomes more unsettling when tens of thousands of giant Nile crocodiles show only their eyes above the water as they hunt. And among volcanic rock, hot sand, and constant danger, millions of flamingos still gather in bright pink ribbons, turning the place into a contrast that feels almost impossible to believe. Laguna de Bacalar. A ribbon of fresh water, about 26 miles long, appears in the middle of the forest, where the ground sank and revealed a maze of 7 brilliant shades of blue fed by hidden underground rivers. Beneath the lagoon live billion-year-old stromatolites, true living fossils that helped create oxygen on Earth and still survive quietly in the crystal-clear water today. You can easily be fooled by the blue water and white shore that look like the Caribbean Sea. But this is actually a 100% freshwater world with none of the salt of the ocean. Hidden below the lagoon are giant sinkholes more than 300 feet deep, appearing like dark ink stains and creating sudden color boundaries where the ground can seem to vanish after only one more step. This place is not only naturally beautiful, because it was also once a route used by pirates in the 17th century, and a stone fort built in 1729 still stands like a guardian over the old secrets of these waters. As you glide above fine white calcium sediment like powder, it feels as if you are touching the dawn of life inside a masterpiece that is silent, pure, and almost overwhelming in its beauty. South Pole Station, Antarctica. Standing at the very bottom of Earth, this research station sits in an endless sea of ice, where people live on a frozen sheet about 9,301 feet thick. The place follows a brutal cycle of about 6 months of constant daylight and 6 months of polar darkness, and winter temperatures can plunge to about minus 116 degrees Fahrenheit. To avoid being buried by snow, the whole station stands on lifting supports that can raise the building over time. When light bends through drifting ice crystals, the sky can produce the sundog effect, making it seem as if 3 suns are burning at once on another planet. In this silent white realm, every compass becomes useless because no matter which way you walk, you are only heading north. Even with the risk, the remoteness, and costs starting around $50,000, people still dream of coming here to watch the sky torn open by ghostly auroras.